As a newly minted physician, I can testify to how easy it is to lose track of empathy in the stress and tedium of our day-to-day work. But whenever I find myself ignoring injustice or dismissing suffering, I remind myself that my patients are as full of stories as I am. Writing down my patients' stories and my own has been something that sustained my humanism throughout medical school, and it has never been more important to me than it is now during my intern year. It helps me feel connected not just to my patients, but also to my colleagues and to my very best self. I want to thank the Arnold P. Gold Foundation and the Tang Goodwin family for encouraging us to share and reconnect with our common humanity through these stories. I'd like to share one of these stories with you now. "This guy should be dead," my resident said as she assigned me my first surgical patient. I could see him through the window of his SICU room, twisted, pale, silent, the ventilator's hiss his only sign of life. "He's a 92-year-old male airlifted in last night from an island off the coast with a ruptured AAA, post-op day 1 from an open repair and partial colectomy and renal failure. Have fun." She bolted off to finish rounds as I padded quietly into his room. Feeling like a small child talking to a doll, I murmured, "Hello, Mr. Wilson. I'm a medical student. I'm just going to listen to your heart." As I placed my stethoscope gently against his sunken chest, his eyes rolled open, boring into mine. He reached towards me with a gnarled hand, clutching my wrist as if I were a life preserver, or perhaps an attacker. With a flash, I realized we were alone, and he was hurting me. "Mr. Wilson, it's okay." His eyes wild, he opened and closed his mouth around the tube that was keeping him alive. He twisted my arm, pulling me down toward him. I pulled away but couldn't break his grip. "Do you know where you are?" I asked. Instantly, he was still. He raised his eyebrows inquisitively. As I explained where he was and what had happened, his fingers slowly relaxed, and he drifted back into a sedated twilight. I dutifully went about my med student chores, checking his vitals and ventilator settings, upping his sedatives, tracking his creatinine, and futzing with the colostomy bag. But although I felt guilty admitting it, every moment I spent taking care of Mr. Wilson made me more and more miserable. From my earliest medical school days, I'd thrived on relationships with my patients. Histories shared, goals negotiated, lessons taught and learned. With Mr. Wilson, there was none of this give and take. There was only his powerlessness, his speechlessness, and a creeping sense that we were doing these things to him and not for him. Every time Mr. Wilson emerged from the sedation to find me at his bedside, he would clutch my arm, dragging me down toward him as he had that first time. Soon, however, it stopped frightening me. I would simply tell him his story, who he was, where he came from, and why he was in the hospital. One day I found a newspaper from the island where he lived sitting by his bed, where a visitor had left it. A tall, elderly gentleman grinned at me from the front page. It was Mr. Wilson, featured in a 2-page profile piece only a couple months before. Standing by his bedside, I read how he had been a great stage actor in New York before he and his wife, a singer, moved to the small island, where he'd become a taxi driver and a celebrated jewelry maker. He was a busy, vibrant man, the article said, who never stopped moving, and who regaled anyone who got into his taxi with stories of stars like Elizabeth Taylor and his days on the stage. So the next time he woke up in the grip of confusion, I talked to him about New York City and different kinds of jewelry, and assured him that we would call his fellow cab drivers to check on his wife, since they had no children or close family. For the first time, his eyes crinkled and the corners of his mouth twitched. He held my hand tenderly and raised his eyebrows up and down to answer my questions, telling me what hurt and what didn't. And for the very first time, I felt like I was helping him by finally giving him back his own story. Unable to control his body, silenced by the ventilator, and trapped in a medicated haze, both he and I had lost track of who he was. His kidneys, intestines, and lungs were failing. Neither he nor I knew if we could save them. But by using whatever knowledge I had about his life and his body, I could change how he perceived himself and his illness and root him once more in his own identity. I was like a narrator. If unable to determine his ending, I could at least guide him along the way. Nearly 2 years after I took care of Mr. Wilson in the SICU, I traveled to the island he was from to rotate in its small clinic. The local doctor told me Mr. Wilson had recovered enough to be extubated, but that he passed away from renal failure about 2 months after I'd met him. He never made it back home or spoke with his wife again. I asked for directions to the weathered house where he and his wife had lived. Finding the door ajar and the TV on full volume, I stepped into the entryway and found her sitting in a white plastic chair with a pocket-sized black and white photograph of her young husband taped on the wall next to her. "I'm so glad you've come," she said when I explained who I was. "It's not sad to talk about my husband anymore. We loved each other so much. Didn't we, sweetie?" It wasn't until she kissed her fingers and gently touched his photo that I knew she was asking him, not me. Then, turning back to me, she said, "Now, let me tell you his story." And holding her hand as he once held mine, I sat down to listen.